Welcome back, AI curious folk, to AI Ramblings Daily, episode 104. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Parekh, your human AI guide, and as usual, things are moving at a clip. Let's get started. Today's theme, semiconductors. Whether it's AI GPUs, memory chips, remain the key gating factor to consider, especially on the local side, local computing side, where computer prices, smartphone prices are just all going in one direction and will remain that way likely for the next couple of years. Even Apple signaled that they are not going to be immune despite their huge global supply chain advantages on this front. So today, I want to discuss three items related to semiconductors and, as usual, provide my takes on each and overall. First, let's talk about OpenAI. They announced their Jalapeno AI chip is making progress. For those who may not remember, I wrote about them last year. The OpenAI, like most of their frontier model company peers and other big tech cloud company peers, have all built side chip ventures with companies like Broadcom, basically to provide a second source, third source beyond Nvidia, which most of them continue to rely on for over 60, 70, 80% of their AI chip needs. These things for each of these companies are multi-year investments, billions of dollars. And so this Jalapeno AI chip, what they announced, and I'll have the details in the show notes as usual, is basically their progress on these chips, primarily optimized for inference, which is when you and me, we use AI services with our prompts and questions and voice interactions, etc. The inference compute is the creating the tokens for AI agents, reasoning. That's what these chips are designed to optimize for. Recognize that NVIDIA is not focused, sorry for the double negative, on this opportunity. In fact, Jensen makes a key point, at every one of his keynotes, the most recent GTC one inclusive, that on inference, NVIDIA's chips, especially the Vera Rubin class, continues to be the state of the art in terms of efficiency per token, which is actually the key metric, because tens of billions of dollars are going into the data centers. You want to make sure all the chips there optimize for the power inputs and for the efficiency coming out of these things. And even though these alternative chips like Jalapeno from OpenAI for their own additional inference compute things are interesting technically, they are still an add-on to the overall broader show. So for the near term, the market is big enough for all of these efforts, both the in-house ASIC chip, as it's called, alternatives by companies like OpenAI, and obviously all of their peers, but also what NVIDIA is doing in terms of supplying the majority of the market for these kinds of chips. So that's the first item I wanted to discuss. The second one is on the memory chip side of the equation, which also has been in a tear of late. SK Hynix out of South Korea is the biggest company that just overtook Samsung, which is its other trillion-dollar cousin in South Korea. Both two of the three leading memory chip companies, oligopoly as it were, with Micron here in the US, in Idaho, being the third one, also $1 trillion plus. All of these stocks have been tremendous performers the last year or so. The semiconductor indices around the world have seen performances of several 100%. And, despite the recent ebbs and flows, SK Hynix basically announced today that they were going to be tapping the US market, as it were, while the iron is hot. They've announced a $29 billion US listing on NASDAQ ADR to raise this by early next month. And the proceeds would be used to expand their supply, which again, as I said before, takes years to do so and is needed given the extraordinary supply constraints. Here, it's less to do with trade and tariff things between US, China, more to do with that there's only a certain amount of capacity that these three companies have to make the wafers for the memory chips, DRAMs, NAND, SSD drives, etc., and use that capacity for the higher margin, bigger revenue opportunity on high bandwidth memory, HBM memory for AI data centers. And that's what's been going on. And as a result, it's resulted in the average bill of materials on an iPhone or a laptop going from 5% or so for memory to 30-40% and going higher. It's why Apple just announced that they're likely going to have to raise their prices as well. So this on the margin is good news, but recognize all of this will take, this additional capacity will take time, and so it remains to be seen how it will alleviate some of the shorter term demand issues, which remain only in one direction for now. Again, lot of details in the notes. I've written a lot about this, so do take a look at that. The third event I want to talk about is just the last few days. You've seen a little bit of retracement in the broader tech markets and chip stocks in particular, an ebb as you will, if you will. And my perspective is that these stocks have had such a big run. Again, not stock advice here on the podcast or Reset to Zero, but you've had several 100% moves, especially on the semiconductor stocks around the world, not just the three I mentioned, but a whole host of others, SanDisk, Kioxia in Japan, just a whole host of names that I've talked about in detail. And given these moves, it is of course expected to see volatility increase, and it's par for the course. And this obviously is an ongoing issue. Competitively, these companies don't face too many other alternatives out there, except there are some rising options out of China, which the US government has put some restrictions or a frowning eye, as it were, on companies like Apple that have said, hey, maybe we can access some of that new DRAM supply out of China. It remains to be seen how that sorts out, especially with the upcoming meeting between President Xi here in DC in September and the Trump administration's desire to strike some sort of an overall broader tech deal with China. And maybe this is part of the mix. That would certainly help in the context of just rising, exploding prices for computers. In fact, if you look at Microsoft, which in many ways has been the core catalyst with their iconic partnership with OpenAI back in 2019, where they invested $1 billion and then another $12 billion, and they've never looked back, obviously, until the relationship got modified a few months ago. Microsoft is ironically seeing a huge hit to their PC empire, Windows PC empire, which is comprised of hundreds of OEMs that make Windows laptops and computers around the world. That market is seeing a retracement in the 10, 15, 20+% numbers on units. And right now you're seeing a contraction in the global PC market as a result of these exploding memory prices and storage disk prices, etc. And so Microsoft being a catalyst on the AI side, which obviously fueled the huge shifting of memory production from local computer chips to data center chips. Microsoft was obviously a big catalyst of that with OpenAI, and then Nvidia, the big beneficiary. But the unintended consequence of that is just the impact on computers. And in fact, Microsoft's other business, Xbox, where they've invested hundreds of billions of dollars, those consoles are seeing price increases of, again, 20, 30%. And as a result, a retracement in their business models. So this is an ongoing issue. I'll have a lot more to say about all this in subsequent posts. I've been talking a lot about this, but this ebb and flow on chip stocks is to be taken. My overall take is that the short-term trends here continue to be in one direction because the shortage, there are no easy answers except for maybe some geopolitical relief in terms of some of the US companies being able to access extra memory supply in China. But that is still in its early stages of being figured out. So watch this space, as it were. Let's move now to the gadget AI side of the discussion today. Google is back in the home speaker game. They have a new $100 Gemini speaker. They've had a very successful series of Nest speakers over the years. They discontinued all of that a little while ago, as Google is wont to do on these things. And they have a new latest entry in the home speaker market. I bring it up because AI devices is something that everyone's expecting a lot from as a category. I've written a lot about this, and we're going to see a whole host of new AI-powered home speakers with screens, without screens, from everyone from Amazon, which has already upgraded their Alexa Plus lines, to Apple is expected to improve their home speaker lineup with the new Siri AI, which launches to the mainstream in the fall. And this is Google's shot ahead of all of that with this $100 speaker. I'll put a link to some of the representative early reviews where they say the speaker quality is not as good as some of the other options. But if you are a user of Gemini AI, it is an interesting device to access through voice Gemini's AI capabilities if you're in the Google ecosystem. So it's an interesting first leading product out this year, kind of ahead of the fall rush of these devices. Yesterday, I talked about AI smart glasses, which is the other category of AI devices that we're going to see a plethora of in the coming months. Speakers in the home with displays, without displays is another category that's going to see a lot of offerings. Google's the latest, so I thought I'd talk about that, which then leads us to our questions of today. And one of the questions that I wanted to pick, given what we're talking about, is what's my favorite feature with these home speakers? And for me, it's still the prosaic uses, and I have all of them, the Alexa, Google, and the Apple ones around the place. And boringly enough, I still just use them for time, weather, timer, and music playback, not necessarily beyond those categories. And that's been the case for this category for all of these companies, despite the tens of billions of dollars invested to date. And that's why companies like Google keep coming in and out of the market. Now they're back in because of AI and Gemini. So what's my least favorite feature with these devices? I've talked a lot about this. I'll repeat it again, is the wake words. These things, even though they're supposedly always listening everywhere, the manufacturers have not fixed the core problem, which is that none of these devices, especially given that everyone wants to be the AI service on your phone, knows which one to respond with when you say, hey S or hey A or hey G. You know who I'm talking about. It'll more than likely, over 50% of the time, will be the device on the other side of the room rather than the one in your hand. And they haven't figured out how to do this. I've actually gone deep into the technical aspects of this. It's a tough problem technically to solve. And there are a bunch of approaches. One of the issues is that there is no horizontal standard across these devices. So each company has their own strategy and standard, and that is mucking up their ability to solve this problem. And I think this is one of the core problems to solve before AI devices can be successful, because that is one of the biggest frustrations that comes out of the reviews of these devices, is that these dang things, they don't seem to respond correctly in terms of when and where which device is being spoken to. And oftentimes they'll respond when they're not being spoken to because they're always listening and misinterpret a word for a keyword, and they say, hey, you want to help? I've had that often happen to me when I'm talking to my spouse, and Apple's Siri over there thinks that I'm talking to it. Just weird. But anyway, so that's my big rant on that subject and my biggest dislike of these devices to date, and they need to fix it. Anyway, I hope you found all of that interesting, including that little product review at the end. Today's AI Reset to Zero piece is number 1127. I talk about Microsoft picking a side on the AI stuff. So take a look at that. As usual, I appreciate your joining us, AI curious folk. Stay tuned.